How you doing, my holy sisters and brothers? That's Shlomo Katz singing his Nigun Mitzpah. How's everybody doing? Let's light up the darkness. Big, busy daf tonight. 3 Mishnas. Let's not waste any time. Who's with us? Shandor from the Bronx, Tom from PA, Stephen in New Hampshire, Paul in the Great Northwest, Bella in Florida, Nancy in North Carolina, Yehud in South Carolina, Paula in Chicago, James in Indianapolis, Bill in Mid-Missouri, Fred in Miami Beach, Gwen in Michigan, Sharon in Lebanon, New Jersey, Melissa in Great Neck, Belle in Texas, John in Sedona, Valsa in Calgary, Canada. There's a new name. Welcome, Valsa. John in Lewiston, Maine. Lucy in Minnesota. Karen in Northern California. Welcome, welcome. Great to have you all with us. Marjorie in Georgia. Lynn in North Texas over on the YouTube side. Tonight's episode of AT Daily, sponsored by our dear friend Zach Plotzker on the yard site of his son, Yehoshua Aaron ben Yitzhak Shlomo. May Yehoshua Aaron's memory always be for a blessing. May our learning tonight accrue to his infinite merit in the world of souls. We say amen. Zach, may you and Mrs. Plotzker and your whole family and all your loved ones be showered in blessings. We say amen. Thank you for enabling us to share more Torah with more people around the world. And also, may Yitzhak Shlomo ben Miral Devora have a refuah shlema. And we say amen. Where are we holding? This is Masechta Moed Katan. These are the laws of the festivals. This tractate is the 12th tractate of the Talmud. We're still in chapter 1. Tonight, concluding our discussion of Mishnah number 4 and beginning Mishnah's 5, covering Mishnah number 5 and beginning Mishnah number 6. We're on page 8. We're picking it up near the top. The Gemara is analyzing this Baraisa. The fourth Mishnah was about whether a person who has tzara'as, this physical manifestation of a spiritual malady that erupts as kind of blemishes on the skin. We don't have this disease in the world anymore, but when it existed in ancient Israel, when the whole population, the Jewish people, had a loftier spiritual level, and we merited to have this condition in our midst, this kind of divine feedback for using our mouths in unholy ways and speaking Lashon Hara. So when this condition was possible to have, there was tzara'as of the body, of the skin, also of a house, also of clothing. But you wouldn't actually have it. You would have the blemishes, but it wouldn't be called tzara'as, and you wouldn't be tameh from, you wouldn't be ritually impure from the tzara'as until a qualified Kohen, a qualified priest, expert in the laws of tzara'as, came to you and examined you and said, yes, that is tzara'as. Only then do you become impure from the condition. And he might well say, that's possible tzara'as. You're going to be quarantined for a week. I'll come back, and then I'll either tell you, no, you don't have it, you're free to go, or yes, you do have it, and then you're going to be quarantined and, have to say tameh to people when you walk by them. Excuse me, until the condition passes. Then you go through the purification process, which takes 7 days. And as we discussed yesterday, during that 7-day period, that's when a mitzora, somebody who has that condition, is not allowed to engage in conjugal relations with their spouse, but they are allowed while the person actually has the condition. And that's where we see that this is not a sickness. It's not a disease, like a virus that comes into you, or bacteria or something like that. It's not a contagious disease. It's a physical expression of a spiritual malady. And that's so there was not risk that you would infect your partner by having close physical contact with them, but you would have to abstain while you're going through that purification process. All right, so the Gemara now is analyzing a related Baraisa. And so the master said that, as the verse states, but on the day it appears in him. So we're talking about, why is this related to the laws of the intermediate days of festivals? is whether you would bring the priest to examine you to either confirm that you have it or confirm that you don't have it or tell you that you might have it and quarantine you, etc. Do we bring the priest to do that examination during the intermediate days of the festival? And the answer is no, we don't, because you might have it and then, your joy in the festival will be diminished. Since you're not infectious per se, it can wait until after the festival, so you should enjoy the 7-day festival, and then you can be examined by the priest afterward. And the sages are in the process of deriving how we know that from Scripture. So the master said that, as the verse states, but on the day it appears in him. So from this, it may be inferred that there is a day when you examine, meaning the priest examines the symptoms found in this person, and there is a day when you do not examine those symptoms. And the Gemara asks, well, from where in this verse may it be inferred that the priest has a choice? And Abaye said, if it were so that the priest must always examine the symptoms immediately, well, then the merciful one should have written simply, on the day it appears in him, that's when you bring the priest. What is implied by the actual formulation of the verse, which says, but on the day? Learn from here, i.e., from the seemingly superfluous word, but, at the beginning of the phrase, that this is not an absolute law, but a conditional one, depending upon other factors. So there is a day when you examine the symptoms of tzara'as that are found in this person, and there is a day when you do not examine. And Rava offered a different explanation and said the entire phrase, but on the day, is superfluous. Not just the but the whole but on the day. As if it were so that the priest must always examine the symptoms immediately, so the merciful one could have simply written, when it appears. What is the meaning of the additional words, but on the day? Learn from here that the issue is dependent on many other factors, and so there is a day when you examine, and there is a day when you do not examine. And the Gemara explains, and according to Abaye, who derives the law from the word but, why does the verse include the extra phrase, on the day? Abaye would say that phrase is necessary in order to teach that the priest examines the symptoms of tzara'as only during daylight, not at night. And the Gemara asks, well, from where does Rava derive the law that the examination is performed during the day but not at night? They agree that it has to be performed during the day, but what phrase or what verse in Scripture just teaches that law? And the Gemara answers, well, Rava derives it from the verse, as far as the priest's eyes can see, Leviticus 13:12, which indicates that the priest must be able to carry out a careful examination of the symptoms of tzara'as, and this cannot be done at night when his vision is limited. And Abaye could say that this verse is necessary to exclude a priest who is blind in one eye from inspecting the symptoms of leprosy, as it says eyes, plural. And the Gemara asks, well, but Rava also requires this verse to teach this law, i.e. that a priest who is blind in one eye is unfit to examine the symptoms of tzara'as. So the Gemara answers, yes, it is indeed so. He agrees that this verse is the source of the law concerning a priest who is blind in one eye, and it is not the source of the law that the priest may only view those symptoms by day. Okay, so then from where does Rava derive the law that a priest examines symptoms of tzara'as during the day but not at night? The Gemara answers, he derives it from the verse that quotes a homeowner saying to a priest regarding tzara'as of a house, there seems to me as it were a plague in the house, which emphasizes that the symptoms are seen by me and not by my light, i.e., that this takes place during the day, not by the artificial light of a candle or a lamp or something. When the next verse states that the priest comes to view the symptom, it means that this also takes place by day. And why does Abaye require the proof that he adduces when it would seem that the verse that Rava brings offers sufficient proof? Why isn't Abaye satisfied with Rava's proof? And the Gemara answers, according to Abaye, if the source was derived from there, I would have said that this law, that one must wait until the light of day to examine the symptom, applies only to the symptoms of a house. However, in the case of impurity of the person's body, perhaps the priest may conduct his examination even by artificial light, as it is a more severe impurity, and maybe we're in a hurry and it has to be examined right away, even if it's nighttime. Therefore, the verse teaches us, but on the day, to indicate that even in the case of impurity of the body, the priest may perform the examination only during the day by natural sunlight and not by artificial light. That is the law, and it is also the law that we don't bring the priest to, even when the temple is standing and tzara'as has returned, like when Mashiach comes, that it will be optional when the priest comes. Just because the person has symptoms doesn't mean we have to bring the priest right away. And if it's during a festival, even the intermediate days of a festival, we don't bring the priest to examine until the festival has ended. That was Mishnah number 4. Mishnah number 5 here of chapter 1. Rabbi Meir also stated another leniency concerning the laws of the intermediate days of a festival. A person may gather the bones of his father and mother from their temporary graves on the intermediate days of a festival. What? Pick up the bones from a grave? Yes, because the burial customs in ancient times were completely different than today. In ancient times, it was customary to first bury a corpse in a temporary grave. After the flesh had decomposed, the bones would be collected, placed in a coffin, and buried in a vault together with the bones of the deceased individual's ancestors. And that's why we've been reading in the Torah that Joseph brought Jacob's bones with him out of Egypt and buried them in the cave of Machpelah. Right? That's why Jacob is buried there, even though he died in Egypt. He's buried alongside Leah and Rebekah and Yitzhak and Abraham and Sarah in Hebron. Only Rachel got left out, and she's in her own grave on the road to. So where am I? On the road to Bethlehem, right? So that's what they did. And then Joseph also, he died in Egypt, and he made his descendants promise to bring his bones up out of Egypt. And so when Moses led the children of Israel out of slavery in Egypt and back through the desert for a few years and eventually the promised land, they had with them the bones of Joseph. Same idea. So coffins and dirt, that's more of a modern phenomenon. So Rabbi Yosef says one does not. So now we're saying, can you gather the bones from the temporary grave on the intermediate days of a festival and transfer them to the cave or the crypt, or where they're going to be stored in a more permanent way? So a person may gather the bones of his father and mother from their temporary graves on the intermediate days of a festival. And this is permitted on the intermediate days of a festival because of the fact that one merited to bring the bones of his deceased parents to the graves of their ancestors, and this is a source of joy for him. We don't want to diminish people's joy on a festival. You might think that handling the bones would diminish his joy, and therefore you shouldn't do it. But according to Rabbi Meir, it doesn't. It gives him joy that he's able to bring them to the final place of rest alongside their ancestors, and this would be a source of joy. Rabbi Yosef says one does not gather these bones on the intermediate days of a festival because it is a source of mourning for him. Even though he is happy to be able to bury his parents' bones in their ancestral graves, he's still pained by the memory of their death. What is the law? One may not gather his parents' bones during a festival, and certainly not the bones of other relatives, in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yosef, whose opinion is accepted as the law when he disagrees with a colleague, right? So Rabbi Yosef, very authoritative. And all agree that a person may not arouse, ye'orer, lamentation for his deceased relative, and he may not eulogize him during the 30 days before a pilgrimage festival. Now, eulogizing, we've encountered this before. It doesn't just mean that somebody died and then there's a memorial service and, we come and say nice things about him. When they're talking about eulogizing, they're talking about a little bit more of a production. And in ancient times, this even would involve hiring a professional eulogizer. Most people weren't deemed qualified to speak a eulogy, but a professional eulogizer was someone who would not only artistically recall the merits of that person and, bring honor to the recently deceased, but would be so skilled at that he would make everyone cry, right? And since he's for sure going to make everyone cry, we don't want that going on, right, during a festival or even 30 days before a festival, and we'll see why that is. That eulogy, it's not like we're not going to do it. We're not going to give that honor to the person. It can be delayed, right? And it was like, leaving this world was like this multi-step process, right? There was the memorial, there was being accompanied to the grave, there was the burial. Then after the shloshim, then there's a shiva for 7 days. The shloshim is a month of other kinds of slightly lesser mourning practices. And then the person, the child, for example, the son of a deceased parent, is going to say Kaddish for them for 11 months. And so there's time to do that eulogy later and not do it during a festival. All right, that's the Gemara. That's the Mishnah. The Gemara raises a contradiction to Rabbi Meir's opinion that gathering the bones of one's parents is considered an occasion of joy based on what is taught in a Baraisa. One who gathers the bones of his father or mother mourns for them the entire day, but he does not mourn for them in the evening. So you mourn for them like when you're sitting Shiva. So if the day comes, right, if you're going to put them in a temporary grave and you're not going to transfer the bones to the permanent resting place until all the flesh is gone, well, that could be quite a while. Months could have passed, maybe years. So at the time, so when you come back, it's like you're not going to be in that immediate pain of having lost the person. Nevertheless, if you're going to handle that person's bones, you're going to have to conduct yourself like a mourner on that day. And most likely you're going to, be brought into a state of mourning when you're handling the bones of a deceased and close relative. So there's actual laws about that when you do handle those bones, you have to be treated and act like a mourner on that day. But you're not going to go into like a 7-day mourning period of Shiva. It's just during that day, during the daylight of that day, that night, you're no longer a mourner. But at any rate, we have a source that says a person is treated like a mourner because he is a mourner on that day, and we don't want him having that experience during a festival when he needs to be rejoicing in the festival. That's why the law follows Rabbi Yosei that we don't do this. We don't make that transfer of bones during the festival. And Rav Chisda said, and even in a case where he does not gather the bones from a temporary grave, but where he had them bundled up in his sheet, when he buries them, he mourns for them all day. And this indicates that gathering one's parents' bones is an occasion of mourning rather than of joy. Even if you're bringing it to the final resting place that they wanted to have, it's still not a source of joy to handle the bones. Abaye said, say that Rabbi Meir means that collecting and reinterring the bones of one's parents is permitted on the intermediate days of a festival, not because it causes one joy, but rather because the joy of the pilgrimage festival is upon him. The pain of gathering the bones of his parents is overpowered by the joy of the festival, and it shouldn't matter that much, but that's Rabbi Meir's opinion, and we don't follow it. It is taught in the Mishnah, one may not arouse lamentation for his deceased relative during the 30 days before a festival. Okay, during the festival, I get you don't want to bum people out so they can be rejoicing in the festival, which is a mitzvah. But for the 30 days before the festival, it's not a mitzvah to rejoice in the festival. So why would we prevent eulogizing and lamentation during that 30-day period? And the Gemara asks, what is meant by one may not arouse lamentation for his deceased relative? And Rav said, in the West, in the land of Israel, whenever a professional eulogizer would circulate and ply his trade, they would say, let all those of bitter heart weep with him. And when they would say this, all those who had recently suffered losses would recall their pain and lament their losses, right? So the professional eulogizer, like maybe he wasn't available all the time, but when he came, it was like everyone would bring their grief to that day and sort of pour out their hearts. It was like that was the day to get it all out and have that cathartic experience. And it is taught in the Mishnah that one may not arouse lamentation or eulogize for his relative for 30 days before a pilgrimage festival. So 30 days before Passover, Shavuos, or Sukkot. Okay, and the Gemara asks, so what is different about 30 days that it is prohibited for one to lament the dead for specifically that amount of time? Why is it 30 days? Why not 2 weeks? Why not 6 weeks? And Rav Kahana said that Rav Yehuda said that Rav said there was an incident involving a certain man who saved up money to ascend to Jerusalem for the pilgrimage festival. A professional eulogizer came and stood at the opening to his house. And the man's wife took the money that he had saved and gave it to the eulogizer for his services. And as a result, the man who was going to go up to Jerusalem did not have enough money, and he refrained, and he did not ascend to Jerusalem for the festival. And at that time, they, the sages, said, one may not arouse lamentation for his deceased relative, nor may he eulogize him during the 30 days before a pilgrimage festival. There's the idea of paying the eulogizer. There's the idea of creating this big memorial and spending all that money. And it might get in the way of the preparations for, the planning to, the expenses of, etc., of making the pilgrimage. And they didn't want anything to interfere with people making that pilgrimage up to Jerusalem for the festival. And Shmuel said, now we're on 8b, it is because the dead is not forgotten from the heart and put out of mind for 30 days. That's why the Shloshim, the 30 days after a death, is when, there's a real change in the mourning practices. So it is because the dead is not forgotten from the heart, nor put out of the mind for 30 days. And therefore, when one laments the loss of a deceased relative within 30 days before a festival, so then the pain is still remembered on the festival. Interesting that what they're saying is, like, if somebody dies, they die. So if you lost a close relative, let's say 2 weeks before the festival, presumably the pain would still be on you. Could you go up? Would you go up to make the pilgrimage? Well, what they're saying here is maybe yes, maybe no. But if you had the professional eulogizer come and make you really weep it out after the death, then you'd be much less likely to make the pilgrimage. And the Gemara asks, what is the practical difference between the two reasons? You don't go because you might spend money on the eulogizer rather than going up to the Jerusalem, or we don't have these lamentations because a person who hears that kind of lamentation is still so saddened by it that he won't make the pilgrimage. Not only the one who lost a relative, but everyone who hears the eulogy. So that's a real important difference. Not just the one who lost a relative, but everyone who heard the eulogy. So what is the practical difference between these two reasons? The practical difference between them, either way, you don't bring in the eulogizer. So what's the difference? The practical difference between them is in a case where the eulogizer performs the eulogy free of charge. So in that case, there's no worry that money had been set aside for the festival will be spent, but there is still room for concern about the lingering pain that will be felt on the festival. That was Mishnah number 5, and discussion, that was quick. Now Mishnah number 6. Now remember, we also got a Mishnah number 7 tonight. So Mishnah number 6, one may not dig crypts or graves on the intermediate days of a festival in preparation for those who are still alive, but one may adjust previously dug crypts on the intermediate days of a festival in order to receive a particular corpse. And one may also construct a laundry pond on the intermediate days of a festival, as it does not involve excessive effort. And one may also prepare a coffin if he is together with the corpse in the same courtyard, as in that case, everyone knows that he is preparing the coffin for the deceased. And Rabbi Yehuda prohibits making the coffin unless one has wooden boards with him that had already been cut before the festival and that need only to be attached. Remembering that in ancient times, it wasn't necessarily that a person dies, you get him into a wooden coffin and get him buried within 24 hours. That's a more modern practice. In ancient times, they would do the temporary graves. They wouldn't use a coffin at all, let the body rot in the dirt like that, remove the bones to a crypt. Very different practices. And Rabbi Yehuda prohibits making the coffin unless one has the wooden boards with him. Gemara. The Gemara asks, what are crypts and what are graves, right? So in Aramaic, what are kuchin and what are kevaros, right? So what are crypts and what are graves? So these words are not exactly what we think of them as. So Rav Yehuda said, Crypts are constructed by digging, and think more like a cave, a chamber underground. And graves are constructed by building. We think of a grave as a hole in the ground, but for a prominent person, it often has a building around it, right? That's why we say that a kever, we go to visit the kever of the righteous, kever tzaddikim, or keverim tzaddikim, right? So we're going to visit the graves of the righteous, but there's always like a building over the grave within which we pray. So Rav Yehuda said, crypts are constructed by digging and graves are constructed by building. And the Gemara adds, this is also taught in the following Baraisa. These are crypts and these are graves. Crypts are constructed by digging and graves are constructed by building. It is taught in the Mishna, but one may adjust previously dug crypts on the intermediate days of a festival. The Gemara asks, how does one adjust a crypt? And Rav Yehuda said if the crypt was longer than the corpse, he shortens it. With regard to this issue, it was taught in a Baraisa. He lengthens the crypt and widens it to make it the right size for the particular corpse. It was further taught in the Mishnah, and one may also construct a laundry pond on the intermediate days of a festival. The Gemara asks, what is a laundry pond? Rav Yehuda said, this is a ditch dug in the ground for washing clothes. The Gemara raises a difficulty. Isn't it taught in a Baraisa, a pond and a ditch, which indicates that they are different from one another? And Abaye said, and some say that it was Rav Kahana who said, a pond is a small pond, i.e. the only difference between them is their size. A laundry pond is larger than a laundry ditch. And it was taught in the Mishnah, and one may also prepare a coffin on the intermediate days of the festival if he is together with the corpse in the same courtyard. And the Gemara comments, we already learned this as the sages taught in the following Baraisa. One may tend to all the needs of the deceased on the intermediate days of a festival. One may cut the deceased's hair for him if it was too long. One may wash his clothing, i.e. the shrouds for him. One may construct a coffin for him from the boards that had already been cut from the eve of the festival. And Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel says one may even bring timber and discreetly cut it into boards in the privacy of his house. You don't want to be doing construction during the intermediate days of a festival. But for the needs of the dead, we do whatever is necessary. We dig a hole, we make a coffin, we take them to it, we transport them. Anything that's necessary for the honor and the needs of the dead, we do it. Still today, on the intermediate days of the festival, no problem. That was Mishnah and Gemara of number 6. Mishnah number 7. One may not marry a woman on the intermediate days of a festival, not virgins and not widows. And one may not perform levirate marriage with his sister-in-law, meaning a man whose brother was married and died childless, and then he has to perform chalitza or marry the widow in Yibum, which was an ancient custom, and it's written about in the Torah, right? That if your brother dies before he has a child, so then you marry his widow, and the first child with her is considered the son of your brother who died childless. And if you and she don't want to marry each other, then you perform the ceremony of chalitza. So we don't do that during the intermediate days of the festival. Why? Because it is a joyous occasion for him. So wait, we didn't want to deal with moving bones because it brings us down. Rabbi Meir said it causes joy. Rabbi Yosef said it doesn't cause joy. It actually brings you down, and therefore you don't want to do that during the intermediate days of the festival. Now they're saying you can't have a wedding during a festival. Not if it's a first-time marriage nor a second-time marriage. Well, clearly a wedding brings joy. It's not going to bring us down. Why can't we have that during the intermediate days of the festival? Because it causes joy. What are they trying to tell us? Hold tight. We'll get to it. And a woman may engage in all her usual cosmetic treatments to enhance her physical appearance on the intermediate days of a festival. Rabbi Yehuda says she may not apply lime to her skin. I guess that's a depilatory. Because it is temporarily a disgrace to her, as she is unattractive before the lime is peeled off and will therefore be distressed during the festival. The Mishnah continues, a layman who is not a skilled tailor may sew in his usual manner to make a shirt or repair a shirt. whereas a craftsman, a professional tailor, may form only temporary stitches because he doesn't want to be doing his regular work during the festival. And one may interweave the cords attached to the frames of beds upon which a mattress is placed. And Rabbi Yosef says one may only tighten the cords but not interweave them. Weaving them, right, that's like construction, manufacture, production. That's going to have to wait till after the festival. Gemara. It was taught in the Mishna that one may not marry a woman on the intermediate days of a festival because it is a source of joy for him. And the Gemara asks, and if it is a source of joy for him, what of it? Isn't there a mitzvah to rejoice on a festival? Rav Yehuda said that Shmuel said, and so too Rabbi Elazar said that Rabbi Oshaya said, and some say that Rabbi Elazar said that Rabbi Hanina said, the reason that one may not get married on the intermediate days of the festival is because one may not mix one joy with another joy, as each requires its own celebration. Like, for example, if somebody had a birthday in June and it always landed right around Father's Day, so you shouldn't have one party to cover both Father's Day and his birthday. There should be a Father's Day celebration and a birthday celebration. My birthday's in June. But my mom, her birthday's in May. Mother's Day's always in May. We might have been tempted to do Mother's Day and her birthday together. No, they deserve separate joy, separate joy. And likewise, you don't want to do a wedding during a festival because there's the joy of the festival and there's the joy of the wedding, and each should have its own joy. Rabbah bar Rav Huna said, different reason. Not because we don't want to mix joys, but rather the reason is because he forsakes the rejoicing of the pilgrimage festival and occupies himself with rejoicing with his wife. Makes sense. The joy of the newlyweds is a higher joy for them than the festival, so they forget about the festival and, just get into being newlyweds. Abaye said to Rav Yosef, this statement of Rabbah bar Rav Huna is actually a statement of Rav. As Rav Daniel bar Katina said that Rav said, from where is it derived that one may not marry a woman on the intermediate days of a festival, as it is stated, Deuteronomy 16:14, and you shall rejoice in your festival. This verse emphasizes that you must rejoice in your festival and not in your wife. Ula said the reason one may not marry on the intermediate days of a festival is due to the excessive exertion. Remember how we started this tractate, that during the intermediate days, you can do work to prevent a significant loss as long as it doesn't require excessive exertion. Doing excessively difficult work, no good on the intermediate days of the festival. So Ula is saying, if you had a wedding during the intermediate days of the festival, this would create a lot of work for the people who are putting the wedding together. And Rabbi Yitzhak Napacha said the reason is due to the neglect of the mitzvah of Peru Urevu, be fruitful and multiply. If it were permissible to get married during the intermediate days of a festival, so then people would delay getting married until the festival, when the family's going to gather anyway, when they're busy making a party anyway, and they could save some money. Right? And just have a double celebration, the wedding and the festival. And since they're going to wait for the festival to do that, then the couple will delay getting married for that reason, which means that they will not be getting busy with the work of being fruitful and multiplying until later, right? The delayed wedding means delaying the mitzvah of being fruitful and multiplying. The Gemara raises an objection from the following Baraisa. All those whom the sages said are prohibited to marry on the intermediate days of a festival are permitted to marry on the eve of the pilgrimage festival. Right? We said no eulogize. I'm almost done, so if you've got questions or comments, get them in. No eulogizing for 30 days before the festival. Because that could bum you out and suck up resources, and you're not going to make it to Jerusalem for the pilgrimage. But a wedding can be held right before the festival, and that is okay, according to this opinion. right? That there's an objection from Raisa. All those whom the sages are prohibited to marry on the intermediate days of the festival are permitted to marry on the eve of the pilgrimage festival. This poses a difficulty to all of the opinions, as a wedding celebration ordinarily extends for 7 days, and the majority of the celebration will coincide with the festival. So aren't we going to be mixing joy and joy? Aren't we going to be redirecting all kinds of resources to the wedding and not to the festival, or duplicating that festival, or are we going to create a lot of work and exertion for the people who are putting the wedding together and the 7 days of rejoicing that follow the actual wedding itself? What are we going to do with that? Tune in tomorrow at noon Pacific, our usual Friday time. Okay, let's see if we have questions or comments. Okay, questions or comments on Moed Katan, Daf Ches, page 8. Lucy, but if you think you are having tzara'as, you must be having some skin illness. That might be contagious. Do they not address that somewhere, or were they not aware of physical skin conditions? You're saying, so tzara'as is not like a disease of the skin that is contagious. But what you're saying is, yeah, but if he's got something going on in his skin and it's not tzara'as, well, then maybe he does have something that is contagious on the skin and they shouldn't be getting together. But I think what we've seen is, all they said is not you should be having conjugal relations, but that it is permitted when you are a confirmed mitzorah, right? So there, you know that it's tzara'as. It's permitted to have conjugal relations because that is not a contagious condition. The one who touches you does become tameh, ritually impure, but that's just a quick purification. The purification of the mitzorah takes 7 days. The purification of somebody who just touched a mitzorah, that can be done, that day, immerse, and that night at nightfall, that person is pure. But it's a good point. When you're talking about the doubtful mitzorah, somebody who might have tzara'as or might have something else, so maybe that would be a good time to avoid touching. Tom, but can a person with suspected tzara'as participate in religious ceremonies of the festival? So that is the perfect question, right, Tom? Because, why are they not going to bring the priest to examine him? Because he might have it, and then his joy in the festival will be diminished. So until the priest says you have it, or you are suspected of it, it's nothing. He's got nothing. So it seems to me that even though he's got something, he's looking at it and he's thinking that might be tzara'as, maybe something. But until that priest looks at it, it's nothing at all. And therefore, yeah, he could go in, he could enter the temple. Could he, if he's a Kohen, could he serve in the temple? Maybe that's what you're asking. Now, that's a really good question. Now, he is a Kohen, but let's say he's not an expert in examining those blemishes. But there's a lot of other Kohanim around at the temple. And since they are at a very high level, maybe just the possibility of tzara'as would be enough, because we already know that a Kohen cannot serve in the temple if he's got a blemish, even a temporary blemish. Or is that the same kind of blemish that is also a possible tzara'as eruption? Maybe. I'm going to guess, and I'm only guessing because I'm not sure about this, I'm going to guess that if a Kohen thinks he possibly could have tzara'as, he's not going to serve in the temple. But that if a Yisrael thinks he might have it and he doesn't have a priest look at it, that's not going to prevent him from entering the temple. I think that's the way that I'm reading it. Let me know if anybody finds something different. And Tom, are all known baraisas collected anywhere? I'm not aware of a collection of all the baraisas. There's just so many of them that are mentioned in the discussion of the Mishnas, right? In the Gemaras that comment on that Mishnah. But the whole idea, the difference between baraisas and Mishnas is that the Mishnas are, authoritative enough that Yehuda Hanasi compiled them into the Mishnah. And the baraisas, some of them contradict each other, whatever reason, not as authoritative. So they're used in analyzing the Mishnas, but I don't know that there was a collection made of them. And finally, John Smith, how many books is the full Talmud? So I think there's 43 tractates. That doesn't answer the question how many books, right? And that depends on the edition of the Talmud that you're talking about, because the Art Scroll, for example, I think is 72 volumes, because like a very long tractate like Shabbos is 4 books, 4 volumes. Whereas shorter tractates, you might have 2 or even 3 tractates included in one book, right? So that's why different editions will have a different number of books. But it's 42, I'm pretty sure it's 42 tractates. The question that you'd want to ask is how many tractates in the Talmud? I'm just going to double check that. How many tractates in Talmud? 63? No. Okay, 63 includes Mishnas, volumes of Mishna that don't have Gemara, right? So yeah, so there's 73 volumes of Mishna, because not every volume of Mishna has Gemara. For example, Pirkei Avos is a volume of Mishna, but doesn't have Gemara. So in a full Talmud, there would be 63. But in a regular, Talmud where all the Gemaras are part of it, do I not have a simple answer to this? I'm pretty sure it's 42. Pretty sure that it is 42 because I counted it. But I guess the official answer is 63 when you talk about all of the tractates, including the ones that are only Mishnah. Okay, that's what I've got for us today. God's help, be together again tomorrow for page 9. Have a great night.